Welcome back to Sports Performance Radio. This is B.Chavez. I am your host, and as I said, welcome back. I'm glad all of you could join me. This is the December 2015 episode, numerically episode number 003, and I typically don't mention that, what episode number and where chronologically a show fits, but I want to with this one because some of what I'm going to talk about here, the intro, is things that are to come. 2016's some changes, some hopefully additions and improvements. One of those specifically is the show will in fact become available in podcast, true audio-only podcast format. I've been very happy with the YouTube approach, the kind of multimedia, picture, audio, background video scenario that I have on YouTube. I'm very happy with that. That kind of was my vision for this show from the beginning, but I have gotten many requests, many for a show of this size, many requests for a true podcast type format that people can listen to while driving, while working, while whatever, that they just simply don't need the multimedia immersion. They just want audio. And some people even only have the ability for audio, something that I kind of have to say I didn't really consider when putting this together. So the show will in fact be available on the hosting site Podbean. It will be teamevilgsp.podbean.com. And I will, of course, include that as it gets up and running. But the site is sequestered, paid for, and the shows are being loaded as we speak. So it is definitely something that's going to be available for the 2016 season. Another thing that is going to change or add on and improve is I'm going to be doing some kind of non-SPR shows, some kind of, haven't figured out what I'm going to call them. I don't know if they're going to be the Sports Performance Radio supplementals or coverage shows, or haven't really narrowed down what they're going to be, but a number of friends, colleagues, and just general acquaintances are thick in their competitive season as we speak, literally, as I am recording this on Thanksgiving Day. Good friend of ours and very first guest of Sports Performance Radio, Patrick Castelli, is in Europe. He's in Sweden competing at 90 kilogram World's Strongest Man. He's over there with the 90 and 105 kilogram World's Strongest Man. And he has agreed to kind of take some notes and some background information and come back and give us kind of a bird's eye report on how that went, placings, the general macabre of the show, and the landscape of lightweight strongman. So that's going to be kind of not fall under the heading of Sports Performance Radio. It's not a science show. It's not for the geeks. It's kind of current events. But it's also in our world. It's in our strength world, and it's going to be interesting. And I hope to bring a number of these shows through the coming year. So that'll be a change and improvement. And as with everything with me and with the show, it will be evolving. It will kind of happen as it happens. So I'm excited. I hope you all come along with me on the journey, and I hope you give me your feedback so I can get it right. So, on to kind of today's show. Two quick little news stories I want to cover. One, just kind of something that I said in the beginning I wouldn't do, but this one I want to do because it's important. It's kind of a little feel-good piece, and that is the World Raw Bench Press record has been elevated. I'm embarrassed to say the person who did it was completely foreign, no pun intended, completely foreign or unknown to me, and I hope I'm not butchering the man's name too badly, but Syraichev Kirill, Russian, he, on November 22nd, 2015, benched consecutively 310, 330, and a world record of 335 kilograms, which comes to 738 pounds for all of you in the United States. The rest of the world is pretty comfortable with kilograms, but 335 or 738. I'm usually a little skeptical about things of this nature, but I watched the video, and boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, I gotta tell you, it's possibly the textbook example of a perfect bench press. A measure of control. Actually, I kind of chuckled to myself when I watched the video. The person that came out to hand off the lift didn't look like they were capable of budging 700 pounds, and yet bar just slid right out of the rack, took position, which means that Mr. Syraichev Kirill is ridiculously strong. bar descended. Not only was it a pause, but there was no sink into his chest. The bar literally hovered at t-shirt level and just ascended to a perfect lockout. It was the ideal bench press. So pretty amazing stuff. Like I said, I typically don't cover kind of that sort of thing, but I'm a huge raw lifter, huge raw lifting fan, and I think it's worth mentioning that that we now have people benching raw what could once only be done in shirts. So it's pretty exciting stuff. Another news story could be a fizzle, could actually be big news. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I'm going to read you the headline from the AP Newswire. Word for word, I'm going to leave out some bits, but what I read is direct quote from the AP Newswire, and it says, Monday by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Across a 323 pages, it implicates athletes, coaches, trainers, doctors, and various Russian institutions, laying out what is likely the most extensive state-sponsored drug program since the notorious East German regime. Quote, it is worse than we thought, end quote. Dick Pound, founding president of the World Anti-Doping Association and author of the report. So that's kind of interesting. Certainly to anyone with a brain, it's not news. Every international athlete out there is doping. It's just the way it is, folks. Being able to implicate actual institutions and agencies is kind of big news, but yet it kind of isn't. Pretty much the world at large has known that countries with a social and political structure like Russia have been doing that on a state-sponsored level since they've been there. It's really not news, but from a socio-political and economic level, it might be important. And the reason I mention that is this next quote. And it says, Russian officials responded with defiance, disputing the investigation's findings. Quote, whatever we do, everything is bad. Vitaly Mutko, the Russian sports minister, told his news agency Interfax, if the whole system needs to be shut down, we will shut it down gladly. We will stop paying fees, stop funding Russian anti-doping agencies, the Moscow Anti-Doping Laboratory. We will stop paying fees and save the money. That is interesting. I don't know if Russia really has the constitution to do that and just kind of be ostracized from international sports, but it would be interesting, and it would be a staggering financial blow to the knuckleheads at WADA, and I'm curious to see who backs down first. That really, to me, is the news story, is kind of an international monetary game of chicken between the drug users and the drug testers. That will be very interesting to see how it plays out, and I hope to keep you posted on that. And I hate to be a dick, but I kind of hope the Russians stick to their guns and play that out, because WADA is just a hypocritical, politically just destructive thing. I kind of would love to see them actually get their panties pinched up, but I'm suspicious. But it'll be interesting. It really will. And my opinion aside, it is news. So all of that aside, on to today's guest, to December 2015's guest. I'm crazy about this show. Just got done editing it, and I have to tell you, it's by far and away the best thing that I've ever been involved in. It's amazing. It's awesome that the last show of the year will be the best, and hopefully it sets the footing for the new year. The guest you are about to hear is Lyle McDonald. Lyle is the diet guru. We're talking about a guy that goes back 2 decades or more, had his roots with interacting with Dan Duchaine. This guy is everything. Anything you need to know about diet is about to be covered in the next hour and 15 minutes. Lyle himself you can find at bodyarecomposition.com. I'll put that link in the description below, but it's one word, bodyarecomposition.com. He's an author, a number of very famous books, A Guide to Flexible Dieting, The Ultimate Diet 2, Rapid Fat Loss Handbook. I know some of these, if you don't know them specifically, they sound kind of trendy and cool. They're not. These are thick, science-rich, real-world applicable books. This is great stuff. Another book, one that is my favorite and kind of my go-to tome on the subject, that is The Protein Book. Great piece. If you own anything of Lyle's, it should be that, in my opinion. So what's about to follow is Lyle just giving an hour and 15-minute dissertation, essentially, on the science of body weight manipulation, body fat loss, what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, what you could do better. Literally every book you own on dieting you could probably throw away and just follow the next hour and 15 minutes as your guidelines for all future body weight concerns. It's an excellent video, and I can't thank Lyle enough. So enough out of me. The next thing you will hear is Lyle telling you everything you need to know about body fat loss. All right, let's get to it.
All right, everybody, as promised, we are on the phone with one of the good guys. I am so excited for this. We are here live with Lyle McDonald. Lyle, how you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, B. How are you?
Good. I am excited. As I told you, I'll say it here again in the public forum, I am literally a fan. It's rare that I get to interview somebody that I am a fan of, and I am. I've followed your work for 2 decades, perhaps, and I'm just really excited and really gratified that you would take the time to speak with me and my listeners. So,
absolutely,
I'm really excited. So you are going to talk to us about all things body weight manipulation and body fat loss, yes?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about, we sort of talked when we were off recording about just sort of dieting in general, but especially dieting to more of the extremes. I've years ago it sort of identified or dawned on me. We've kind of got these 3 separate categories of dieters, and they tend to have very specifically different issues. At the very extreme, a typical overweight, obese person, there are physiological problems there, but it tends to be more behavioral. Like it's a lot of bad habits. It's a lot of years of poor eating, and, there's some dysfunctional systems in the brain and reward systems, but usually it's just a matter of finding some behavior changes and getting them started. In the middle, and here I would say, for men, that's maybe 15 to 25% body fat. For women, 24 to 30%. That's kind of a happy medium. There's not really a lot of issues. Like, yes, dieting sucks and it will always suck, but you don't really run into any major problems. And by problems, I mean stubborn fat issues, really severe muscle loss, metabolic slowdown. Like, it's starting there, but it hasn't really gotten in your way. Really, and then there's this third group, and this is the group that's, below 15% for men. Some would use 12% or whatever. For women, low 20s, trying to push down further. You've got the guys that they want the six-pack. You've got women that want to, lean hips and thighs. For men, that's pushing into really single digits, even if guys don't want to accept that. For women, you're looking at the middle teens. That's really when you run into a lot of problems. Body's fighting back hard, metabolic rate, hormones are doing some very bad things. For women, that can result in loss of the menstrual cycle. Men can get erectile dysfunction, sex drive starts to drop. Something I like to joke about is, we spend all this time and energy getting a perfect body as a guy, and then your dick won't work. So it's, the little irony of life. And then, of course, at the very extreme of that, you've got contest dieting for physique sports, bodybuilding, the new men's fitness. You've got female bodybuilding, such as it is, female physique and fitness. And by there, you're looking at men, 4 to 5% body fat, women 10 to 12%. Pushing down is really just it's almost an exponential version of before. A lot of guys with some effort, some discipline, they can get to 8%. It's hard. It takes a while. But getting from 8 to 4, that's a whole other story. Same thing for women. Middle teens, 15, 16, 17, it's not easy, but it's doable. that last push to get, really the last little bits of body fat off at that extremes. You mentioned you were a competitive bodybuilder, so you know the drill. It just gets exponentially harder for exponentially less results. So what I really wanted to kind of focus on was that third group, that leaner group that's sort of trying to get either fairly lean or even at the extremes. And some of the problems they either typically run into are really more of the mistakes that they make. Because what happened over the years, as bodybuilding became very pharmaceutically assisted, was that a lot of mistakes got covered up. A lot of the problems that naturals face simply you don't have to deal with when you're on drugs, which is why they're so fantastic. And a lot of the dieting practices, and especially training practices that came out of drug-using bodybuilders, really don't work. Like, they really fail to produce when naturals try to follow them. And so that's kind of really what my focus, what I wanted to talk about, was those issues naturals have to deal with. And kind of as much what they should do as what they shouldn't do, since I see the same errors kind of cropping up.
And a lot of those things would have some crossover content even into drug-using athletes.
Oh, sure.
I would think, yes.
I think, you run into an issue. I don't work with pharmaceutically enhanced people, but coaches I know that do, better training and dieting is always superior to worse training. And like the fact that drugs will cover up for bad habits or bad dieting and training practices doesn't mean that better training and diet practices don't still work more effectively. So there certainly is some crossover. It's just when you can add throwing drugs into the equation, you can certainly get away with a lot more.
Fair enough, and very interesting. And and I hope my listeners as well are going to be very interested to hear this, because I think we have a blend of people listening to the show.
Okay.
I think probably because of me and the macabre that I bring, it probably leans toward the extreme of the extreme, both real science files and even performance files, which probably relate to drug use, at least to some degree. But I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, and especially as it relates to women, because that's a hot topic and truly a difficult topic. So, but by all means, launch into it, but dazzle me. I want to know.
And just, a little bit more introduction. I'm a big science guy and big into the deep physiology, and I'll try to stay away from too much of that, other than more as, some explanatory background for some of the comments I'm going to make. But as far as pharmaceutical stuff, what you find is that what bodybuilders figured out over the years through trial and error or getting into the research or whatever was sort of ways to fix this stuff. Like they basically ended up plugging all the holes and all the problems that they were running into. So like the same pathways that tend to be limiting and problematic for naturals, there's usually a drug solution for it. And if you look, I think, at the drug regimens of most hard dieting bodybuilders for contests, you'll find that they're probably taking something to address every single one of them, which is part of why they have the success that they do and part of why naturals frequently don't. So anyway, without that out of the background, probably I think the first error that people tend to make is underestimating their dieting time. And this is actually true across all categories. We've got this old, very simple, and frankly wrong math that says 1 pound is 3,500 calories. Ergo, if I reduce my food by 500 or increase my exercise by 500 calories a day, I will lose 1 pound a week. It's been repeated for decades, and it's completely wrong for a number of reasons. The first of which being that value only holds for a pound of pure fat, right? Fats, triglyceride, 1 pound of adipose tissue is about 450 grams of fat, about 90% fat, about 3,600 calories. Like, that's where that number comes from. Now, if you're losing 100% fat, that number holds, that 3,500 calorie value holds. But it's very rare to lose 100% of fat when you're dieting. It can be done if you do certain things correctly, and I'll talk about some of those later. But what ends up happening is the effective deficit for that 1 pound of fat is actually generally higher than the 3,500 weekly deficit, right? So it may end up being 10 or 15% more. You might actually have to create a total deficit of like 4,500 calories because some of those calories are not coming from fat tissue. So that's the first place that number falls apart, right? It's you just don't see that 1 pound of fat per week with that really simple math. There's a couple of other reasons, not the least of which being that, right, we've got our total daily energy expenditure, how many calories we burn in a day, resting metabolic rate, the thermic effect of food, how many calories we burn when we eat, thermic effect of exercise, and then there's this new one called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's the calories we burn that's kind of moving around. It's anything that's not exercise. So let's say you're
cost
maintenance
of
calories.
Life. In my vernacular, I just call that the cost of life.
Yeah, basically. So, and unfortunately in the modern world, most of us have a very low requirement for NEAT, right? Most of us sit in front of a computer all day. It's not like you get up and move around. You know, if you're a day laborer, sure, you burn a lot of calories. Most of us have a very low NEAT. And it actually turns out that NEAT can vary between two people by 2,000 calories a day, which is ridiculous. Like, that is such an insane range. When you consider, you know, total daily energy expenditures. But in any case, let's say your total, we add all those up and you're burning, you need 3,000 calories a day to maintain. Fantastic. So, time for simple diet logic. I'm going to reduce my food intake by 500 calories a day. Across 7 days, 3,500 calories, the magic 1 pound a week. The problem is that number, that 3,000 calories, changes. And this is where people really go wrong when they criticize the energy balance equation. There's all kinds of dum-dums saying, oh, the energy balance equation is false and the math never works. It's because they're treating it as a static number rather than a dynamic system, right? As soon as you reduce your calories by 500 calories a day, right, your thermic effect of food, which is about 10% of that, that goes down automatically. So within 1 day, you've reduced your thermic effect of food by 50 calories. Guess what? Your magic 500 calorie day deficit just became 450. Right there, the math fails. Immediately the math fails. If you added activity, that wouldn't necessarily be the case, but the other components change too, right? When the people diet, what do? They're tired. They move around less. NEAT goes down. That huge non-exercise activity thermogenesis component can frequently go down a lot. You do a hard-ass workout, and 5 or 6 hours later, you don't move around as much. So the body is really phenomenal at compensating. And what the upshot of all of this is that people vastly underestimate how long they need to diet to reach their goals because they do that simple math based on 500 calories or whatever it is. They crank it out. They go, 1 pound a week. I need to lose 10 pounds. Cool. 10 weeks of dieting. Yeah, it never works. It never works. Now, it does work if you take thermogenic compounds to keep your metabolic rate up and you take growth hormone or Clen or whatever to make sure that you're burning 100% fat. Those conditions, you can probably keep those numbers right spot on. But for everybody else, it doesn't happen. So you get guys that, you know, they math it out. They're like, yep, I got to lose 10 pounds to get from 12 to 8% or whatever, or even worse for contest dieting. And they start too late. You know, you hear these stories about professional bodybuilders that they do a 12-week contest cycle, diet cycle. What you don't see are the drugs that are getting them 2 pounds a week of true fat loss with anabolics to prevent muscle loss, anti-cortisol drugs to prevent, you know, all the problems are plugged with drugs. Naturals need to basically figure what their estimated dieting time is and then add 50 to 100% to that. So if you've predicted that you need 12, if you've predicted that you need 12 weeks to get into shape, you better start at 18 to 24 weeks out. And yes, that is 6 months of dieting. That is not a joke. Got a good buddy who coaches a lot of natural body, and seriously, he starts contest diets 6 months out from a show. Small women may need more, but like that's truly realistically how long it's going to take, even if the math says it should take half of that. So you've got that's one big issue, which is often coupled with the fact that people think they're a lot leaner than they are. If you ever get bored, go online onto some of the forums, and you'll have people that are visibly very fat getting told that they're 15 to 17% if they're a woman, right? At 17% body fat for a woman, you will pretty much have a full six-pack and shredded belts. And these girls are nowhere close. But everyone on the forum is like, oh, yeah, you're only 15%. They figure it should take nothing to get to 10% for contest shape. Same thing for men. They think they're 15% and they want to get to 8%, but they're really 18 to 20%, and they're not going to make it. Like, they're not getting into contest shape in any reasonable amount of time. And part of that is problems with the measurement methods and the techniques, but you get a lot of people that, put pictures up online, and I've got this on my forums, for rough body fat estimations, and the numbers they're given are just, people are delusional. Like, guy at 18 is told he's 12, and people just start too fat. And then they underestimate their dieting time, and 12 weeks later, they're nowhere close to where they want to be. And if they're shooting for contest lean, they're the guy that shows up at the contest, and you see him on stage and go, I think he forgot to diet. Like, there's always one dude at every natural show that seems to have forgotten to train and diet. It's really weird. So that's really, honestly, that would probably fix most of the problems. People start too late, they start too fat, they get bored, they get impatient, and they start doing dumb things. And dumb things are kind of the next topics I want to talk about.
Right there's a perfect spot to just interject some radio talk. I agree with everything you said, and something that I try to do as the host of the show is kind of point out continuity. And in our very first show, my prototype episode show, we interviewed world champion strongman, Patrick Castelli, and the one thing he consistently hammered, and he really pointed out over and over that it's why he's better than everyone else is because he very realistically measures his performance against reality and against, statistical numbers. He consistently benchmarks himself against reality, not perception, not his buddies, not, against reality. Whenever possible, take a true third-party scientific measurement of things and use that as your bedrock for decision-making. And it's really the same thing you're saying, and I really like to point out the continuity of successful people and intelligent people seem to have the very same methodology, and I think that's relevant, and I think that the listening public really needs to absorb that, even when it chaps your ass a little bit, because it will. Because it will.
And that's the thing. I mean, I don't want to say that people who get into bodybuilding have any sort of certain issues or insecurities, but you see that in all sports. You see people that surround themselves only with the folks that tell them exactly what they want to hear. And that's why you get that one dude at every show who, he's probably the biggest dude in his gym, but he shows up at the contest and you're just like, I just always wonder. It's like, it's not like running. The magazines exist. You can look at pictures and then look in the mirror and go, that's not really what I look like. And yet, all of his buddies are telling him, you look great, and you're lean, and then you're just holding water, and it's the lighting. And then, of course, when they lose, it's all politics. And it's like, you need to be able to handle that criticism. And like you said, look at very factual measures, not just your buddy going, you're looking good. You mentioned being a power lifter. What's the worst thing anybody can ask in a commercial gym? Hey, bro, did I hit steps? Oh man, I don't want to ruin this guy's day and tell him that he is 6 inches above parallel, but if he's going to actually try to go to competition, he really needs, but his buddies are like, you're ass to grass. Like, you better pick a federation that passes high squats. But there is definitely a need for that reality check. And it's tough with body fat because the methods aren't fantastic, but get regular calipers, get a DEXA scan if you can afford it. That's probably going to be the most accurate. You can sort of correlate those. Try to find someone with experience who can really visually, give you. I mean, I've had people online that put up a picture and I tell them my opinion. No way, man. There's no way I'm that fat. It's the lighting. I go, well, you're in dark lighting, which should make you look leaner. And I got bad news for you. You're fat. So you need to accept that. They don't want to.
I mean, this is certainly your interview, and I agree with you on the DEXA scan, but I know a lot of people don't have access. There are, but I've had very good luck with a simple, generic pair of calipers and John Trillo's body fat formula. I've really had really good luck with that.
Yeah, as long as you've got someone, to consistently measure that knows what they're doing, and even that's the problem. You get people, you go into a commercial gym, you get the generic trainer to measure you, and they'll caliper people at 9% that you're like, no, and mainly because they won't go deep enough. Most people don't like to grab enough fat when they do the measurements, and my rule of thumb is that if you're calipering someone and they don't yelp from pain at least once, you're not pulling hard enough.
Speaking of Dan Duchesne, a buddy of his, John Romano, gave, I think, the very best advice on the subject of monitoring one's own body fat. He said, you don't have to know anything about anything. He said, get a hold of your belly, pinch the calipers, and measure it. It's going to be a number.
Yeah.
Be whatever, 27, 22, 9, whatever it is, a number. He said, diet for a number of weeks, do it again. If that pinch isn't smaller, you suck at dieting.
Yeah, and that's actually really phenomenal advice. Men should really stick with an abdominal type skin fold because that's where the problems are going to be. Women, hips and thighs, thighs tends to be really slow to move. But yeah, find that one. There's usually one really good indicator skin fold, and yeah, that's the John's advice is not bad by any stretch of the imagination.
Just measure the trend. If it's getting smaller, you're losing fat. If it's getting bigger, you're getting fatter. But we'll stop interrupting. Please continue.
Absolutely. So that's kind of like, I said, number one is be realistic about where you're at and be very realistic about how long it's really going to take you because, like I said, what happens is people get impatient if they're on a time, if they've got a date to get in shape by, when they realize they're behind, they start to do dumb things, which is they tend to really cut their calories too hard or drastically up their activity or both, which is an awful combination I'll come back to in a second. But really that's kind of the main one. Another one is actually to be very realistic about, the effort it's going to take. It's lovely for, guys who are like, I want a six pack. For a man, the abs and last area to lean out. You'll have a skinny face, a ripped upper body. Most men don't carry fat on their legs, and abs just take a while. And to have a visible six-pack for most men, you're looking at 8% body fat. Certainly single digits, some guys will get it at 10, but you're not getting it much higher than that. And that's not easy. That takes a lot more discipline than the typical kid, height, whatever, mid-20s guy wants to do. They want to go out and drink and party, and there's only so much you can get away with. It takes a lot of discipline to get there unless you've got super good genetics. And same thing for women. To get to 15%, which is going to be very lean upper body, full six-pack, leanish legs, takes a lot of work. And people tend to really, I think, fail to realize just how much effort they're going to have to put into with the kind of consistency, discipline with their diet, discipline with their training. There's also the issue, if you're going to do a contest, and I don't know how many of your listeners, I really recommend people seriously consider why they're doing it. Like, yes, it will test you. Yes, you will learn a lot about who you are as a human being. However, for the rest of your life, your brain will be fucked up. Because once you've been 5% as a dude or 10% as a woman, any normal body fat will feel fat. Once you've been contest lean at 8% as a male, you feel fat as hell. For a woman who's been 10%, the limits of lower body fat, at 15 to 16%, she will feel fat. It really changes your perspective, and not in a good way. As the same coach friend of mine said, if you don't have an eating disorder starting your contest diet, you'll probably have one coming out. And I don't think that's a facetious statement to make.
It's not in the slightest. There's endless issues that women's bodybuilding and women's physique sports generate, and that's the least of them, in my opinion. But yes, you're absolutely correct.
And I think frequently, there's often a subclinical eating disorder there in the first place, because it sort of you see that a lot in women's sports. But you sort of start with a subclinical eating disorder, but by the time you get to the end, after you've had the endless binges and you're starving to death physically, mentally, physiologically, you hear the horror stories of the 20 to 40 pound balloon ups, and then that just throws women into this binge purge cycle of like, I'm gaining 10 pounds and I gotta starve myself and do hours of cardio, and their water weight already is freaky, annoying, crazy, and oh yeah, it really does mess with people hard. So it's not a choice to be made casually. People, it's exhausting effort. It will mess you up for months afterwards, and you may never be the same mentally when you're done. But anyways, that's kind of number 2, is to realize just how much effort it may take, which is not to say not to shoot for that goal, even at the moderate levels, 8 to 10% for a male is sustainable, although it takes some work. 15 to 16% is sustainable for a woman. It takes some work. These guys that, and maybe this is point 3, you have this really dumb idea, and again, drug users can sometimes do it. People are like, yeah, I want to stay contest lean year round. No. just no. You're not going to stay 5% body fat as a male year round. Well, not if you want your dick to work. Same thing, a woman is not holding 10 to 12% without really doing a lot of physiological damage. At that point, she'll pretty much have lost her menstrual cycle. She's losing bone density. I mean, there's a lot of real major problems.
Losing hair.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff that happens at that level just due to the stress and the effort involved. It really, you hear about, I knew one person who, she was like, yeah, my liver enzymes are up at 900 because she feels the need to do 4 hours of aerobics a day and live on lean protein and broccoli to stay in shape. And it's like, fantastic. So to look, fantastic, make no mistake, your eating disorder is causing your body to eat itself. So good job. So yeah, this idea that you can even, maintain the super extremes of lean. It's like, again, you can stay lean-ish with hard training and watching your diet. But this idea that you're going to stay contest lean year round, which is the other part of, it goes back to point 2. People spend all this time and energy getting, to the physical zenith for that one day, and then it starts to disappear almost by the day. They start getting fat almost immediately when their calories come up, and they try to stay on, keep dieting and keep their calories down or bring them up super slowly. And it's like, look, this is the reality. As a male, you may be able to stabilize at 8, 9, 10%. And be fine. A woman, you need to come back up to 14, 15, 16 till your cycle comes back online, but you're just not staying leaner than that year round. But this is a place where drugs can fix it all. Because all of the problems that happen, if you look at males at that extreme low body fat, you will see thyroid metabolism, T3, in the toilet. Testosterone may reach castrate levels. No joke, castrate levels. As in you cut off your testicles. Cortisol, through the roof. Things like IGF binding protein. I mean, you are in just a severely catabolic state. Well, and your hunger is just off the map. Like, people are just like, you know that you're in the depths of a contest diet when you would rather eat a sandwich than have sex. And that's what happens. This is a situation. There's just random biological trivia. There's a brain chemical called neuropeptide Y that sort of makes you pay attention to food. And they did this really funny study where they injected rats with NPY, and they gave them access to either sugar water or a sexually receptive female. And the rats chose the sugar water. Now, my question, because this is the way I think, why didn't the rat put the sugar water on her back and get in there? But that's just me. The point being that at some point you forget about all other aspects of life other than food. You obsess about it. You think about it endlessly. You can always tell on Facebook if someone is contest dieting. All they're putting up is pictures of food. It's food porn. They are just trying to satisfy their obsession. And I call that stage when NPY makes you its bitch.
I'd love to interject. I really desperately want to keep my intervention in your talk to a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
But by pedigree, I'm a biologist.
Yeah.
And one of the major concepts, one of the major tenets of biology is both on the organism level and on the collective level, is the concept of feedback loops. And everything
Right.
you're describing is both a feedback loop and something that I don't think people take into account. It's normal and natural. It's what's supposed to happen in an organism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your body
absolutely.
does not want this crap going on, and it's implementing the necessary steps to right the ship. You are, by definition, doing something very unnatural. Even if you're not treating it with pharmacology, the very act of forcing yourself to be that lean is, in fact, not natural.
Correct, yeah. And if you look at all of the adaptations in terms of metabolic slowdown, loss of sexual function and interest, leptin goes down, thyroid goes down, cortisol goes up, your sleep patterns get messed up. You know, we know that not sleeping enough makes you move around less. The reduction in non-exercise activity thermogenesis, you burn less calories during exercise. This is your body trying to keep you alive. It is one big energy conservation state. And that's why dieting gets progressively harder. As everything slows down, you end up having to push even further to keep that deficit, to keep that fat loss going. Your body is not only trying to keep you from losing more fat, but it's making you hungry. It's actually making you more attentive to food cues. And in our modern environment, that's a bitch. You know, there's a reason bodybuilders are antisocial shut-ins. If you leave the house, you are bombarded by nothing but things telling you to eat. And in the middle of a contest diet, it's murderous. But then again, if you look at what contest bodybuilders have typically done, okay, they're taking anabolic steroids. That offsets the low testosterone. They play around with cortisol blockers. Didn't work so well. We're not getting into that. They are taking thyroid medication, maintains thyroid hormones. They are taking ephedrine or usually clenbuterol. Clenbuterol maintains the drop in nervous system function. They use appetite suppressants. You know, they're basically all of these, I won't call them defects, to your point, you know, all of these very natural adaptations, they are plugging the holes. Like they have found a way to just fix every single one of them on one level or another, which lets them get away with what they get away with. You'll hear about pros that do stay 4 or 5% year ever claim to. Like I said, steroids, cortisol blockers, thyroid, clen, appetite suppressants, GH, you know, Lord knows what else is going on in there, and it's giving them effectively a normal physiology in a very abnormal state, in a very dangerous physiological state. But again, it makes sense for your body to turn all that stuff off. Women lose their menstrual cycle. If you're starving to death, and dieting is essentially starvation, the last thing you need to do is get pregnant. So that system just shuts the hell off. And as much as many women love that, love losing their period, or as they like to talk about banishing the estrogen, yeah, you're causing permanent bone density loss that you may never get back. And 50 years later, they're going to have potential problems with osteoporosis. It's a really enormous problem.
I agree with everything except I personally used Cytodern back in the day, and I found it to be an excellent adjunct.
Yeah, I'm not really a drug guy, and just what little I read, you know, guys that use the cortisol blocker, Cytodern, and they played around with, I think, RU486, like it caused a lot of joint pain. Maybe it was a dosage issue. I just remember it in the early stages, folks couldn't really make it work.
Well, let me be clear. I didn't say it wasn't without
Sure.
cost,
Fair
but
enough.
it did in fact aid in the preparation for bodybuilding shows. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That. I think it also played a major role in the death of Andreas Munzer. So there is that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So you've got all of that sort of going on that ties into all of this, which sort of gets, you know, and sort of into the next issue is one of the big reasons to start a diet earlier rather than later is it lets you start more slowly. Right? Now, there are times for crash diets. I wrote an entire book about one for short periods of time. They're very effective, but the key there is short periods of time because they do tend to cause relatively more problems, but the diet's over more quickly. It's kind of, you know, you can either diet for a while, for long period, or diet easily for long periods, or diet really hard for very short periods. What people end up having happen when they're behind is they try to diet really hard for really long periods, and that's when shit goes wrong. There's also that reality issue, right? So let's say you start your diet and you're like, gonna go just jump the hell in. Bump your cardio to an hour a day, you cut your calories by 4 or 5, I mean, you just create a big-ass deficit. Fat starts to come off, but, you know, calories are lowered, doing a lot of activity, and then your body starts to adapt, right? Metabolism starts to slow down, energy expenditure starts to go down. Now what, right? You're now in a position where your body has started the adaptation process. Where do you go from here? How much lower can you take your calories? How much higher can you take your aerobics? Like, there is a limit, realistically, physiologically, mentally, to how much you can put together. Not to mention that combination of really low calories and really large amounts of activity right off the bat. Like, as much as I hate the phrase shock the system, it literally does shock the system, but not in a good way. Like, you see this, when you combine those two things, you jack cortisol really, really up high. That stresses the hypothalamus. Actually, in women, I'm working on this book on women's physiology, and their systems are way more sensitive. In only a week of dieting plus 3 hard days of exercise, a woman can start to disrupt her own menstrual function. Okay, let me repeat that. In only 7 days of hard dieting and exercise, a woman can start to see disruptions in her menstrual cycle and in her normal hormone levels. 7 days. And what do women do? Time to diet. 1,200 calories, an hour of hard aerobics every single day, and they fuck their systems immediately, like seriously immediately, and the problems just get worse, right? Then when they stall, what do? 1,000 calories, 900 calories, another hour of cardio a day? Like, where do you go when you're already starting from a hard dieting phase? So starting earlier gives you the ability to start much more moderately, to bring in your 20 or 30 minutes of aerobics a few times a week, to cut your calories. Fat loss starts coming off. Then as it starts to slow, I think if you look at a lot of successful contest dieters who do that, every week they're just making these little gradual changes. Cut their food a little bit, bump their cardio by 5 or 10 minutes a day. And a lot of this experience, but they found that by making these very gradual changes, they sort of keep up with their body's adaptation without ever, so that, by the end of it, you're going to be on less food and you're going to be on a fair amount of activity, unless you're, a big boy. If you're a big 240-pound dude, you will still be eating a lot relatively. If you're a 130-pound female, you're not going to have much food to play around with. Like, that's reality. It sucks, but that's the reality of being a small female. Even a 160-pound lightweight male is not going to...
Let me ask you a question. I have thousands of questions I could, and I desperately want to ask you, but I'm trying so hard to stay on topic.
Yeah.
But this seems like a fair place for this question. Just in a general sense, not necessarily relevant to exactly what you've been saying, but just in a general sense, which to you is more valuable? Energy expenditure or energy deprivation? Which is the more valuable tool, or the first tool one should apply to a diet? More activity or less food?
It really sort of depends, and a lot of it depends on where you're starting from. Someone who's doing very little activity may find it easier to just add in 20 or 30 minutes of cardio. It doesn't even have to be that hard or that much off the bat. Burn a few hundred calories and keep their food the same. People that are already doing a lot of activity for whatever reason, who can't add much more there, may be better off reducing their food intake. Sometimes kind of a mixture is best. Like, I actually remember Dan Duchesne, who we mentioned, he found very empirically that women seem to do better with half and half cardio and calorie restriction, and men did better with less cardio and more calorie restrictions, like 15% and 5 for men and 10 and 10 for women. And I think there's some women-specific issues as far as blood flow and fat mobilization and stuff. But it's not that one is necessarily better or worse. It's kind of what's appropriate. And this is yet another reason, like, again, small dieters get into this worse than larger dieters. Once you reach a certain point with your food, even if you're little, absolute amount of food is just very small, right? 1,400 calories of food is not a lot no matter how you cut it. Once you're at that point, you can't really cut your calories that much further. You just really, you just lose it. You go nuts. You don't have anything to eat. In that position, you may be, adding, increasing your activity is probably the only option. Again, if you're a big boy at 200 pounds who's still eating a lot of food, because from a volume standpoint, you can probably cut your food intake a lot more easily because cardio sucks. So it's really not that one is, better than the other. It's more of a sort of what the situation is. I will say that for whatever reason, women's bodies seem to respond a little bit more poorly to big calorie cuts than activity. Like, for some reason, activity doesn't seem to hurt the menstrual cycle function quite as badly, at least in the short-term studies they've done. But
probably a hormonal response, I would suspect.
There's some vague difference between the two that nobody's really identified what it is. It's just an observational thing. But again, it's a matter of degrees. Women have all dieters have a real tendency to just jump a little too hard into it, and then what happens? Their diet stalls. And then what do? They try to diet even harder, and then it becomes this really bad cycle. There's also, and a lot of it, you get a lot of water water retention that tends to stall or make the diet look like it's stalling. There's actually a certain personality profile that when I'm polite, I call tightly wound, and when I'm being impolite, I just call fucking nuts, that are just, like, you can see them online. They type, whenever they have problems, they're like, why am I not losing weight? And there's lots of exclamation points. Like, you can hear the tension in their typing. You can hear the stress. And there's a certain personality type that is so psychologically stressed to begin with, they are already releasing more cortisol. Like, just off the bat, before they jump into cut their calories by 1,000 a day, jump into an hour of hard cardio, and cortisol just skyrockets. The system shuts down. They hold 10 pounds of water. And what do you tell them? You've done this. You need to eat more, do less activity, and chill. I recommend getting drunk and laid. I think that's usually the best advice for these women. And that can't possibly work. What you're doing is
I affectionately refer to that same crowd as the Cushing's syndrome crowd, because that's essentially what they've given themselves.
Exactly. And women have this weird issue that I just came across that, normally, like you said, there's a feedback loop. Normally, body releases cortisol. That goes to the hypothalamus, tells to stop releasing corticotropin-releasing hormone. Women's bodies, their feedback loop doesn't work as well. They can just continue to jack out more cortisol, and eventually their system can actually pretty much just shut itself down. Like, they can really get themselves into trouble with that kind of thing. So that would be kind of like point 4, is start the diet early so that you can start with a much more gradual diet approach. Like, yes, again, fine. If you're going to do a month diet and just get it the hell over with, and a lot of power athletes seem to feel that their strength takes a hit less, cool. Diet your balls off for 4 weeks. Take off 5 to 8 pounds, and then bring your calories back up. Like, get back to and I think they do it. They make better strength gains by, rather than dieting half-assedly for 8 weeks and not being able to train effectively, they just take weight off for 4, and then they can get back to eating for the next 4. And I think that tends to be more effective. Or
they just have a very marginal attention span, which is, again, one of the less complimentary things I do believe.
But it's true. There's a psychology to it. There's a reason that strength power athletes like a lot of variety, and it's because they have a little bit of ADD, and their neurochemistry is you're not wrong, they don't have the attention span for long diets. Bodybuilders come from more of the obsessive-compulsive disorder end of things. They like being obsessive. They like being meticulous. They like being psychotic for 16 weeks. It's what they enjoy.
It's completely comedic, because I am a strength athlete with the ideology and mentality of a bodybuilder.
Yeah, and they do exist, but as a generality, strength power guys are very ADD, they need constant variety, and bodybuilders they love eating the same thing for months at a time. So fish and rice cakes. So that kind of brings me to the training itself. We talked a little bit about just in general, but I think one of the more damaging things that came out of sort of drug-driven contest prep, right, is we've got this issue of muscle loss. Duchesne wrote about it extensively. It's one of those things that happens, that especially as you get leaner. There's an interesting thing that the more fat you have, the less lean body mass you tend to lose, the less muscle mass you tend to lose on a diet, and vice versa. The leaner you get, the more muscle you tend to use. Tend to lose. Fat is becoming more difficult to mobilize. The body needs an energy source. Boom, it takes muscle. That's the next closest thing. And muscle loss on a diet is a real problem, or it can be a real problem, but especially if you diet in very certain stupid ways. And one of the things that came out of, drug prep was, when we contest diet, number one, we're going to increase our training volume and frequency. Now, this is completely ass backwards. How can you do more training when you have poorer recovery? It never made any sense. However, with enough steroids, you can get away with anything. Number two, there was the idea of burning in the cuts and etching in the definition, or I might have those backwards. It was the idea of moving to high repetitions and short rest periods, for cutting. There's cutting training and there's bulking training. And again, when you've got steroids to offset the muscle loss, you can do that. Has some nice benefits. Burns more calories, depletes muscle glycogen, that helps fat burning, etc., etc. When naturals do that, the muscle goes away. Right? The primary stimulus for muscle growth and also for muscle maintenance is high tension in the muscle. Duchesne talked about this. The early studies by Goldstein, that's the key thing, is high tension loads. When you remove the tension from a muscle, when you're not lifting the same weight, there's no reason for the body to keep it. again, if you have steroids, it doesn't matter. You don't have steroids, that's the singular worst thing you can do in the weight room, is to reduce the weight that you're lifting. Now, I actually did.
As a matter of fact, Dan Duchesne actually counseled me personally on that very subject, and he recommended exactly the opposite. He's training lighter in the off season, proportionally, and actually raising one's training loads as the diet progresses.
Which actually especially if you're using anabolics, it's actually interesting. I came across an old audio interview with his and recently reread the Methylamine 2000 thing. And an issue that drug users always wondered about was, how do we keep the gains when we come off? Well, the new solution is simple. Don't ever come off. But at the time, guys didn't stay on year-round. And what he recommended exactly that. He said, look, the drugs are going to make you bigger and stronger no matter what. Train in a higher repetition range, relatively speaking. Rather than doing 315 for 5 in the off-season and only being able to do 275 when you come off or during your diet, do 315 by 15 in the off-season or whatever, and then you can do 315 by 5 on your diet, which makes way more sense. So, again, he figured out the hard way what absolutely works. When you're eating enough, all you need is progression. As long as you get the volume in, training volume, you'll get the gains. You will gain muscle. When you're going into a diet, you have to maintain that high quality tension load, even if that means, in my mind, reducing your total volume, right? I usually recommend people, I would rather them see them drop the number of sets than drop the amount of weight. And we know from some of the strength, it's usually strength and aerobic work that, you can cut your volume and frequency pretty hard as long as you maintain intensity. That's the key. So let's say somebody was doing 4 sets of 8 at 315 in the squat in the off season. Time to diet, I would rather see them do 2 sets of 8 at 315 than 4 sets of 8 at 275. Because the 2 sets of 8 at 315 will maintain their strength, will maintain their muscle mass significantly better. One good coach buddy of mine, he and I have an ongoing argument. He doesn't believe in reducing volume on a diet, but he's coaching people hands-on, and I'm not. And that's a big difference. The mistake a lot of dieters make, both men and women, whatever the workout says to do, by God, they're going to do it. If it says 4 sets of 8, they're going to get 4 sets of 8 if it kills them. And on a diet, that's not always realistic. You've got those shitty workout days where you really should stop at 2 sets of 8. But without a coach there to go, I think you're done, you're not going to do that. So I tend to err on the side of conservatism to a great degree. I would rather start people with a reduction in volume and make sure they get the quality. It's damage control against the dumb stuff I know people will do in the real world. If I'm working with somebody face to face, I'll make that call on that day, but people on their own, I sort of have to proactively guess what they're going to do to screw themselves up. So in terms of weight training, keep the weight the same to the best of your ability. Reduce volume if you have to. If you want to do that high rep, short rest period interval type stuff, do that in addition. Like cut your heavy weight work back, cut from 4 heavy sets to 2 heavy sets, do 2 sets of 15 to 20 afterwards to get those nice metabolic effects, or do that circuit after the workout. And I think that works phenomenally better than you just can't replace all of the heavy work with light work as a natural. The muscles fall off.
Personally, and again, I don't want to interject too much personally because this is all you, but personally, from my attitude and my experience, leads me to believe that aerobics with weight training, high reps, low rest, keep the pace kind of training. That just pacifies neurosis. That really doesn't have shit to do with your physiology. I think it's absolute nonsense. I'm not much of a cardio guy, but I'd rather see those people stop doing that and go get on a bike. But that's me. I tend to be a bit mean. I tend to be a bit mean-hearted about that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. And that sort of brings, I guess, sort of to the second thing, which is the whole cardio issue, which is, it's funny how for decades bodybuilders use low-intensity cardio as part of their diet prep. And it may not have had a huge effect, but it was a way to burn more calories without having to cut their food. And then suddenly as the whole interval thing broke, it went from low-intensity cardio is good to low-intensity cardio is ineffective to low-intensity cardio makes you fat. And it's like, really? What is this? Seriously. Oh, God, that shit aggravates me to no end, but it's the nature of the fitness industry. Yes, correct. 3 decades that has been shown to be practically ineffective. Yeah, it makes you fat. Okay, if you say so. But that's sort of another issue. You know, we've got all these lovely studies and the interval training, and make no mistake, I'm not anti-interval training. I wrote a book about stubborn fat that used some interval training protocols. It has its place. But again, you've got dieters on lower calories. Recovery is down. There's only so much high-intensity work you can do, right? There just is. You can only throw in so much work before you blow up, you know? Athletes, endurance athletes might do intervals twice a week, and they're eating enough, and they're not trying to squat heavy twice a week. Like, you just can't keep tacking on more and more and more and more shit. And there's a real limit to that recovery thing. There's also the fact, you know, when people are dieting, they usually do some sort of conditioning work daily, you know, to burn some calories or whatever. The old school bodybuilders, you just go and you did your hour on the treadmill or whatever it was, and it sucked and it was boring, but you just did it. And then you got, as soon as low intensity aerobics became bad, you had people trying to do interval training 6 days a week. It's like, are you out of your goddamn mind? But that was that extreme that it reached, and it's just like, you just can't do that on a diet with heavy, like, and then add metabolic weight training and circuits and complexes, and like, there's only so much the body can handle before it really does start to get overstressed. So that's another one of those places that I tend to err on the side of conservatism. It's like, yeah, you might fit in 1 or 2 interval sessions, but realistically, most of what you're going to be doing, if you're doing anything, is probably low intensity. At the same time, some of the overreaction is because people went nuts, right? People went from, well, if an hour of cardio is good, well, shit, 3 hours of cardio must be better. Like, oh, no. You're not an endurance athlete. You know, you can go to any gym, and it's women more than men. Women love to do endless aerobic activity. I've watched women do an hour of hard Stairmaster before an aerobics class. Like, it's just like, look, and again, women's body is way more sensitive. Cortisol goes up. Their system doesn't have the feedback loop working as well. They're trying to cut their calories hard, and the system just cycles down into destruction. But that's one of those places. Again, start early, keep your weight training heavy, maybe reduce the heavy volume, add a little bit of metabolic work if you must. Bring in the cardio gradually, because again, at the end of the diet, where are you going to go? When you're doing an hour 6 days a week, 7 days a week, how much more can you add? If you've gotten to that point and have some room to keep progressing, I knew one guy, very extreme. He started with 2 minutes of aerobics a day. I kid you not. He would get on the bike for 2 minutes, and he added like 2 minutes a week. But he started his diet very, very early. There's also an issue. I had an old training partner of mine, really good guy, natural bodybuilder, phenomenal, and he was of the cardio burns muscle camp, which, well, yeah, if you do it wrong. And I was like, okay, well, how did you used to approach your contest dieting? And he would go from nothing but weight training and eating big to running an hour. Well, yeah, that will definitely make your muscle fall off. But it had less to do with cardio and more to it being a very dumb approach. Fat burning pathways get lazy in the off season. They just aren't. If you're not doing some aerobics in the off season, let's face it, most of us don't. It sucks. Those fat burning pathways kind of lose their ability to do what they need to do, and that takes time to rebuild. So
wow.
You do a couple of weeks.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is something that I simply don't hear people say enough, is disuse leads to enzymatic downregulation, and
sure.
Anytime you activate a pathway, there is a fairly significant, sometimes gigantic, lag in upregulation. You just can't turn a factory on and start pumping out product. It takes weeks and weeks of preparation and training and to get, to start making widgets or whatever your factory does. I'm really glad you said that out loud, because I preach this stuff and I feel like I'm a singular voice, and it's wonderful to hear someone else approach it in a slightly different way. It's wonderful, refreshing.
Well, something I've actually kind of gotten back to, which is, back in the day, there was what bodybuilders used to call hardening phase. And it was kind of this weird intermediate phase between bulking and cutting, where, they would quote unquote clean up their diet and start to adjust their training a little bit, and they would talk about leaning out and hardening up a little bit. And I actually, honestly, it was time for them to change which drugs they were using from whatever to lower androgens to reduce water weight. But I think there's actually a lot of benefit to that, to take a couple of weeks, and again, this gets back to making sure you have time to actually finish your diet. That those first couple of weeks is maybe just bring calories to maintenance, right? You've been eating big, gaining, big boy, you gained your muscle mass or whatever as a girl. Before you really jump headfirst into dieting, let's bring your calories just to maintenance. Let's bring in a little bit of aerobic activity. 20 or 30 minutes a few times a week. Doesn't have to be much, fairly low intensity. You can start to adjust your weight training. If you haven't been doing high reps and short rest period work, man, it sucks the first few workouts. People learned that the hard way, and in hindsight, my ultimate diet too started with those big depletion workouts like Body Opus. And man, if you're coming out of heavy sets of 5 to 8, it's ruining. It's just the worst. It's just the worst thing you will ever do right off the bat, especially with low carbs. So it's like, if you're going to moderate your carb intake, bring them down for a couple weeks. Like, don't jump straight from high carbs to low carb or whatever. Bring them down to that 40% or 1.5 grams a pound or whatever. Bring in a little bit of cardio. Take those couple of weeks, to give those pathways time to start rebuilding, and to bring in some of that work you haven't been doing without it being combined with a deficit that double stresses the system. So I think going back to that, at least a 2-week period, 4 weeks might be better, but here's the thing. People aren't going to do it. People are impatient, and we both know they're not going to. So there's kind of a happy medium to be had. But I think even a couple weeks of that hardening type or the pre-diet, you might call it, is not a bad thing. To sort of get your body back into dieting mode. There's a weird thing, you've probably seen it, where it's like, how like after you're done with a diet, you frequently lean out for the next 2 weeks? Well, there's a thing I've seen where when people start a diet, I swear to God, it looks like they get fatter. For just like the first 2 weeks, there's this weird, my buddy calls it the skinny fat phase. He thinks it's just a little bit of depletion of muscle glycogen, but you're still, like, you look fatter for a couple weeks. Like there's this residual fat overflow from the previous gaining phase. And it's really weird, and that's a good thing. That'll kind of go away. You can address that in that pre-diet phase. And then I guess the fourth, this probably the last thing, and this is really more for the women than men. It's interesting that men are frequently kind of biologically and sociologically drawn to a lot of the right things when they diet, which is to, what do you guys do when they want to get in shape? Lift weights and eat meat. Like, that's what dudes just do. You don't see guys going and being endless cardio bunnies. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to use that term, That's not meant to be an attack on women. That's just the term. Women...
It's the activity, not the demographic that does it.
Yeah, thank you. Women, when they want to diet, they do endless cardio and eat nothing but carbs. And you can find this all the time online. Women are like, I did 3 hours of cardio a day and ate all the carbs. And then as soon as they bring in heavy weight training and jack up and raise their protein and moderate their carbs, it's magic. Like, it doesn't do it in men, but in women, it's just magic. That combination of factors, finally eating enough dietary protein and doing proper weight training, not just fiddling around with light reps and 20 repetitions and light weights and just pissing around in the weight room. Like, when you finally get women to go heavy enough to lift, to work with challenging weights, and even if it's 12 to 15 reps, I don't care. If you can do 30 reps with it, it's too light. I see women leg pressing with a 10-pound plate on each side. It's like, honey, you lift more than that when you walk upstairs, for God's sake. Put some damn weight on the machine. I guarantee you can outlift some of the dudes in here. But as soon as you get women to do that, and magic happens. So it's like, on top of the heavier weight training, if there's a single dietary factor that I wish every person would burn into their brain, and more so women than men, it's eat enough dietary protein. Nothing is more protein sparing. Not carbs, not fats, not ketosis. I don't give a shit what else maybe drugs, but nothing is more protein sparing than eating enough protein. And that's actually one place I think.
Where do you put that number? I'm very familiar with your protein book, but just for the listeners at home, where do you put that number?
Well,
very roughly?
It's funny because this is a place, Duchesne was brilliant, but there were some places, he was originally a steroid guy, and every once in a while some of his nutrition stuff I think fell short. And he really believed in sticking with, a gram a pound of protein or gram per pound of lean body mass. And actually for naturals, that's too low. Same buddy of mine, his guy named Eric Helms, did a really phenomenal review paper looking at all the studies on dietary protein intake, lean body mass loss in lean athletes, right? If you're dealing with people with 50% body fat, doesn't matter. 1.5 grams per kilo is plenty. They're not losing any muscle, and even if they do, who cares? But when you're dealing with lean athletes, A lean male may be losing 1 pound of muscle per 3 pounds of fat. Like, it's really a significant amount, and the less you can lose of that, the better. And, he found that, it could be 2.4 grams per kilo or, up to 3 grams per kilo for lean athletes to spare muscle mass loss. And that's right about 1.5 grams per pound of lean body mass. Like, that's a lot higher than Duchesne had recommended. And I'm almost tempted to say that 1 gram per pound might actually work if you're on steroids. Like, I know the general belief is that you need more protein on steroids.
No, you need significantly less. That's
yeah,
how they
because
work.
the steroids are doing so much to improve nitrogen retention that I think
Correct.
that gram per pound, this is one of those places where I think naturals actually need more because again, testosterone's going down, cortisol's going up, their body is just hemorrhaging protein for fuel, and any protein that's being burned for energy is protein that cannot go to use for skeletal muscle. So the problem with going to 1.5 grams, that's for men. Women can get away with like 1.2 grams per pound. Women don't use as much protein for fuel as men. It's hormonal. Estrogen is very protective against protein loss. So women can use a little bit less. The problem is that when your calories get low, it doesn't leave a lot of else to eat. Like, frequently carbohydrates will end up being lower than you need them to be to support training, and, something has to give. Dietary fat can't go too low. You gotta get essential fatty acids, but like, protein intake needs to be sufficiently high. And for men, again, we're talking 12% and lower, 1.4 to 1.5 grams per pound of lean body mass. And for women, maybe 1.2 to 1.3. That sort of comes into a couple of other issues, and I know we need to wrap up, which is most people diet for too long without a break. I know I said start your diet early, but this is another reason to do so. I hear people on forums been dieting for 6 months straight. Dude, are you out of your mind? Like, I realize if you're carrying a lot of fat, that's what it takes, but physically, physiologically, psychologically, no one can handle that. You crack. And, again, Dan Duchesne ahead of the curve, he had, the carb up and body opus. He recommended taking 2 weeks of maintenance calories between diet phases. I kind of formalized those in my book on flexible dieting, but, I would be remiss not to mention that I certainly wasn't the first one to do it. But one of the ways to offset the general reduction in carbohydrates and potential to lose training quality is to do those high carbohydrate refeeds. That also has the advantage of bringing calories to maintenance. That helps offset some of the hormonal problems. There's a lot of advantages for that, and actually women probably even more so than men because it helps to offset some of the menstrual cycle issues. But, including those refeeds within the context of the actual active dieting phases, and that may be a 24-hour, 1 to 2 day high carb period, loads carbs into the muscle. People actually frequently lean out a little bit when they do that. Training can be maintained, et cetera, et cetera. But I also have long recommending of that full diet break. It's kind of like the pre-diet phase repeated. So depending on how lean you are, and again, this lean population we're talking about, maybe every 6 to 8 weeks, you may need to take 2 weeks off your diet. And I realize that that's insane to people. How can I get leaner by not dieting? How can my diet work more effectively? But it does work. It gives your body time to kind of stabilize, at least improve hormone levels. Like, you're never going to fix them without regaining all the fat again, but you're always better off at maintenance calories than not at maintenance calories. You can bump your training volume up to regain any muscle mass you've lost. It also just, it gives you like a light at the end of the tunnel. The analogy I've used recently is like, it's like when you're driving long distance, driving cross country. Holy shit, this is a 48-hour drive. Nobody can deal with that conceptually. But if you break it into, okay, I'm going to stop for gas every 3 hours. Well, anybody can drive for 3 hours. Anybody, and then you drive for 3 more hours. Anyone can diet for 6 to 8 weeks when you know you've got that light at the end of the tunnel. That's a lot less overwhelming psychologically than, oh my God, 6 months of this shit. So it has enormous physiological, psychological, physical benefits. I mean, anyone that's contest dieted and gotten really lean, it just beats you up. Physically, mentally, you don't recover well. You end up overtrained at the end of it. Having those 2 weeks kind of to give your body and mind a break really goes a long way. it also starts to teach you those habits to maintain some of that fat loss in the long term. So that along with the general dietary stuff, eating enough protein kind of leads into that. Keeping protein high enough means carbs are probably lower than where you want them to be. Insert the refeeds, you get to bump carbs up, refill muscle glycogen, maintain training quality. Training quality is the key to not losing muscle mass along with protein. Have a couple week break every 6 to 8 weeks. And as you get leaner, you actually have to break the diet more frequently, which goes completely against logic. Well, as I get leaner, don't I have to diet harder? Well, yes, when you're dieting, but your body is fighting back harder, and you may have to trick it a little bit more frequently than less frequently, which goes very much against dieting logic. People assume...
Not to go down an entirely new rabbit hole, but just very quickly and briefly, do you put much stock in the resensitization of GLUT4 and all that stuff, kind of the insulin sensitivity improvements of short-term carbohydrate feeds? Do you really think that's real? Outside of you psychologically, do you physiologically think that has much benefit?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking me. Are you saying is the claim that GLUT4 sensitivity goes up or down?
Well, I've heard ridiculous claims on all corners, but do you really think that short-term carbohydrate feeding has much impact on insulin sensitivity or the improvement of fat metabolism or any of the many things that has been spouted by the...
Yeah, I don't think acutely. It's like you mentioned. You don't really see those enormous changes acutely. A lot of this is long-term gene expression, constant stimuli kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people get a little bit too focused on with training keeps insulin sensitivity high anyway. And I typically recommend doing those carb loads around training just to take advantage of that, contraction mediated. GLUT4, GLUT1, yada, yada, yada. So, I think what you might be, I suspect you're asking more about sort of leptin kinetics and metabolic rate upregulation and that sort of stuff, which is usually where the claims come from.
And that stuff takes weeks, if I'm not mistaken, weeks and weeks to really impact.
I think I was one of the first ones to really sort of push that in my, and I was very optimistic that very short refeed periods would have big effects. And in hindsight, flat out I was wrong. I just won't even debate the issue. Certainly, in a couple of days, you can reverse, believe it or not, some of the effects. This actually comes out of some of the women's research that with even 2 days of refeeding, a lot of those, after 5 days of hard dieting, some of those menstrual cycle hormonal disruptions do reverse themselves. So it actually, is it going to just get your metabolism firing enormously or reverse the metabolic adaptations to dieting? No, absolutely not. It's more of gives you a little bit of a boost. I think it's as much as anything, it's a training quality thing. It certainly doesn't hurt to turn off diet-induced catabolism, raising insulin will reduce cortisol, all that sort of good stuff. I don't think the metabolic effects are as lovely or as enormous as we want them to be. Certainly that 2-week period, you're going to see some nice effect. It takes, a few days for T3 production to go back up. T3 has some genomic effects that take a little while to kick in, which is why I recommend that 2-week period. It's a solid 7 to 10 days to get that maximal gene expression off the increased T3 output. So the short ones really are more of a Band-Aid solution, but the 2-week diet breaks in between the active dieting certainly I think have an effect. And even Dan said, measure your body temperature. That was the goal. Morning waking temperature is actually a pretty good indicator of metabolic rate slowdown, and that would actually be probably a more accurate way to track some of this stuff to see if it's having really a significant difference. But it is measurable.
Speaking of how drugs kind of antithically mirror the natural world. Usually what drug users are doing is to fix something that goes wrong in the natural physiology. Dan Duchesne's clenbuterol protocol illustrates what you're saying perfectly.
Yep.
Everything he was looking for and measuring was all of the downregulations in a natural physiology. It's a very perfect dovetail right there.
Clen plus thyroid is a fantastic combination for exactly that reason, because they're very synergistic, and that's a fat burning combo from hell. So that's where sort of I think that's where I would almost finish it up is start early enough, which it almost comes back full circle here. Start early enough, be realistic about how long it's going to take. which means determining how early you need to start. Gives you the ability to not have to jump your training up or cut your calories so hard that you have somewhere to go later in the diet. Training, make sure maintain that heavyweight training stimulus, even if it's that doesn't get compromised. Whatever else you want to do, you don't get to completely remove the tension stimulus. Cardio, you can do a mix. Low intensity is decades proven. Don't go too hard. You just don't have the recovery. A couple interval sessions, and bring that up gradually. Consider starting the diet with that pre-diet phase. Give everything time to kind of get back online, get cranking as far as, the better your fat burning pathways are, the less your body needs to use muscle for fuel. That's kind of the key to it. If you jump into too much hard cardio without that adaptation happening, your body has to get the energy from somewhere. If it can't pull it out of fat, it's coming from somewhere you don't want.
Lyle, let me ask you one last question. And this is, I have vested interest in this question. It's actually an argument I had with a good friend of mine, and I know he's going to be listening. Speaking of, you said cardio enough times there that it made the little flag go up in my mind. Considering the thermic effect of exercise and all of the various things and hormonal actions, do you think there's any major difference in breaking up cardio sessions? Say you're determined to do 60 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Would 3 20-minute sessions be the same or different metabolically than one 60-minute session?
It actually looks like, based on some of the hormonal stuff, that the split sessions might actually be more effective. I seem to recall that one of them, one they did like an hour, rest an hour, another hour, and they actually saw better fat mobilization, better fat oxidation the second hour than when they split them or did them all at the same time. There's a really interesting hormonal pathway. I wrote about it in this weird little booklet at the first of the year called atrial natriuretic peptide, which is actually this new fat-burning pathway recently, 2000, that they identified. It's really interesting. It goes around the normal insulin, catecholamine, like the normal fat mobilization pathways, and I think it has some really interesting potential. Oddly, released by the heart, but mobilizes fat. But what's interesting is that a second session of cardio, after a first session, you actually get a larger release of this atrial natriuretic peptide, which has these really potent fat mobilization effects. So I actually do think that there is some logic to that splitting it might be, a superior approach. It's interesting that bodybuilders, years ago, they added that second evening session. It was probably more of a, just to keep burning more calories towards the end of the diet type of thing, but you do have to wonder if they kind of stumbled onto something that might have been effective. Some of it may be, you use a little bit of muscle glycogen, carbohydrates stored in the muscle in the first session, so you're going to be using a little bit more fat for fuel at the second session anyway. But yeah, there does probably seem to be some rationale for it. I think that has to be balanced against the real world and being able to do that if you don't live in the gym. But, if a bodybuilder wants to do, rather than an hour all at once, do 30 minutes in the morning to sort of start that process, and then they're going to lift later in the evening and then follow that up with 30 minutes more, that might actually be more effective. I'm
really pleased to hear you weigh in on the subject. I had a very similar rationale, but you're a far greater expert on the subject than I, and it's nice to hear what you had to say. That's wonderful. Wow. So there we are. I mean, that is a whirlwind yet concise and fairly easy to follow just dissertation on rational dieting.
Yeah.
Have rational expectations, both on how long it's going to take and how hard it's going to be.
Yep.
Probably add a few somewhere between a few and a bunch of percents to your already rational expectations.
Yep.
And then just very basic principles from there. That really is amazing stuff, and it's exactly a more eloquent version of pretty much everything I've said in the past. So it's wonderful to hear that. As I said, Lyle, Mr. McDonald, I'm a huge fan, and I'm amazed that you would take the time to speak with me and my listeners, and it paid off. That is just pure gold. Anyone who has any interest in manipulating their body fat could pretty much take all of that to the gym today and start making progress tomorrow, which is exactly what this show is about.
Yeah. So
I'm just blown away. I'm bowled over. It was everything I thought it might be and a little bit more.
Fantastic.
I really am impressed, and I continue to be impressed. And I want to say that when your book on women's issues and women's physiology is complete, I would love for you to come on and talk about it. And
absolutely,
I really would, and I don't say this lightly. It's a subject that doesn't get near enough attention, and I think you're just the person to tackle it and bring it to light. I think we can leave it there. Anything you'd like to say in both the description of this video and probably the intro, I will talk about who you are and where you are and how people can and should find you. But is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I think that covers it. I'm glad. I was thrilled to be on this. I love talking shop, and I would love to see more people approach this rationally. I have to wonder how many of the dieting failures that get reported. I mean, yes, dieting is hard. Yes, the body fights back, but intelligent dieting always wins out over non-intelligent dieting. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it sure as hell makes it more likely that people will get to their goals and stay there. So I would love to see more people diet rationally than do idiotic stuff going forward. So,
well, on that, I mean, you can't do anything more than give people the information they need. You can't make them do it. But,
you are correct.
So I am, as I said, just one last time, just a little bit mushy almost, but just thank you for being here and thank you for being on the show. And lastly and most importantly, thank you for being you. Thank you for being one of the good guys. There's not enough people like you out there, and the few that aren't vocal enough. Just thank you, sir.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. I'll keep doing what I do.
Please do, and we will continue to take notice. And when people don't, I will point at it and make sure that they do.
Very good.
So there we are. Fat Loss with Lyle McDonald. Until next time, folks, thanks for tuning in.